And just be like, hey, today we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. It is now called, let's see here, Dyatlov Pass incident. So I have heard about this before, and there have been other interesting things. So although I can't find the specific name on here, what's interesting is the indigenous people of that region called it like Dead Pass or like Evil Pass, something along the lines of like death or evil, or like they stayed away from there. They did not have any, villages over there. It was very like, you do not go on this mountain, you will die there.
Okay.
And over time there have been people that have kind of, played with that and didn't really care. So this is actually in Russia, I believe.
Russia.
It is in Russia. So this is kind of the most prominent thing, the thing that kind of brought it into light. So what's interesting, there's quite a few people here. There was like 9 or 10. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 10 people. 10 people that were going to a local university, and they decided to do kind of like a skiing trip, a little hiking trip in winter up this mountain. And these are people that are they're from the area. I think they're fairly experienced in terms of like hiking and skiing, that sort of thing. This was in like, let's see, they were born in the 30s, like maybe the 50s. Yeah, this was in the 50s. And so, communication on a mountain's obviously not the same as now. I feel like even now it's not like you're going to get cell reception there. But they kind of, like, everybody knew where they're going. It was like a school trip. They, like, hey, if we don't get back by this time, come look for us. And they did give them a little bit of leeway, knowing that, like, there may be a couple days late or something along those lines. Well, this entire camping trip died, which...
Oh, wow. That's sad.
It is
How
very
many
sad.
people is it?
10 people.
10?
One of them was like a teacher, I believe, at the university as well, like leading the students.
What happened?
Well, that's the thing.
What?
That's the thing. Nobody knows what happened. So they kept journals of their expedition kind of going on. Obviously, it's Russia. It's cold, that sort of thing. They had a tent. They had built a fire. It was a little bit past the tree line, so they're up the mountain some ways. Okay, so we're talking about the camp, right?
So is this that mountain that they went on to that was like Death Mountain?
Yeah, this is that mountain.
Wait, who called it Death Mountain originally?
The indigenous people of that region. Like, not Native Americans, because it's not.
That's horrifying.
But like the indigenous, yeah, right. Incredibly. So they had, like the remains of their fire. They had a tent. What's interesting is their tent was ripped open from the inside. They had all run out. Some people with only like one shoe on, most of them barefoot. Which, like, why would they just run out, first of all? Like, what were they running from that they felt?
That was in the tent. Because they were getting out of the tent.
Right, they had to get out of the tent so quickly they ripped it from inside. First of all, that's incredibly odd. They didn't grab any, like...
I'm already horrified.
Protective clothing, any of those things. So they split up. They're separate groups. Some of them ran down the hill towards the tree line, right? And there are branches had like broken off. Oh, whoops. There are branches that had been broken off. Like, I think it's up here. It was like 14 feet up, like incredibly high. And there was like traces of skin and stuff along these branches. And these are like big branches, like these massive trees. It's like 14 feet up, right?
So like they were like thrown in the air or something?
Well, it's interesting. So, okay, let's see here. On top of it...
Well, how else do you have flesh 14 feet up in the air?
They think they tried to climb up. People were a little bit burnt. They think maybe they tried to start a fire. A lot of them were in their underwear. So 6 of the people that were on this trip died of hypothermia, technically, and 3 of fatal injuries.
Did it all like go crazy?
That's one of the theories. There were no indications of other people nearby. They looked into the indigenous people. And that was immediately, like, no human could have done the internal damage that was inflicted. They don't believe any person was involved in attacking these hikers. And the tent had been ripped open from within. The victims had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Traces of the camp showed that all the group members left the campsite of their own accord on foot. It wasn't like they were dragged away or anything.
Dude, what if like hellhounds came out or something?
There was high levels of radiation on only one victim's clothing.
Oh my god, hellhounds. That's what my mind went to.
Yeah, to dispel the attack theory of indigenous people, they stated that fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by another human being because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue has been damaged. Released in documents contain no information about the condition of the skiers' internal organs, and there were no survivors of the incident.
I feel like they saw hellhounds and were like, oh my god, and that's what they tried to get away from.
So, one of them didn't die because he left early.
Oh, good for him.
So 9 people died. So one person was found in a ravine nearby, and I think they were one of the last people to be found. And I think that's kind of obvious. Like, they obviously, like, fell into a ravine. I would understand why they died of fatal injuries that way. And they were one of the last people to be found because there's quite a bit of snow covering that. But everybody else, it was, like, light snow. Like, it took them, like, a few weeks to find everybody. And it wasn't like, because one of the theories was an avalanche. And that's why they had to, like, run so fast. And they, but again, there was no, like, conditions for an avalanche were not existent. This mountain in and of itself would not have had an avalanche. They also would have probably had more time. Their tent would have been covered by more snow. Their bodies would have been covered by more snow. Those that had made it to the tree line would not have died because, at least, I mean, not maybe from hypothermia, but they would not have died from that from the avalanche because the tree line would have stopped, like, the snow from coming. There's just literally no evidence of an avalanche, but I think that's, like, the official recorded thing, despite the fact that it's also said that could not have officially happened. So here's another interesting thing. One of them, their eyes were missing. Their eyes were gouged out and missing from their body.
What the fuck?
Another one, I believe their tongue was missing.
Did they all go like crazy and try to kill each other?
But they didn't seem like there was a fight. It didn't seem like they were fighting against each other. Some of them were found to have gone back and picked off clothing from those that had recently deceased to try and protect themselves from hypothermia.
What if they were seeing something and then they tried to pluck out their eyes to stop seeing it?
So, right, but that's because some of the people thought, well, maybe they went crazy, right, from hypothermia specifically, because sometimes, if you feel so cold, it feels like hot. And they thought, well, maybe they, like, just ripped all their clothes off because they were kind of, like, going crazy from the hypothermia, which does kind of affect your brain function, and that's why they ripped their clothes off. But that theory was dispelled because some of them were wearing clothes from the deceased to try and, like, layer up to prevent hypothermia. Just incredibly interesting. It doesn't explain, like, the whole, like, that some of their, like, tongues and eyes and shit were missing. That's incredibly odd. Or the fact that they were, like, running and some people ran to the woods, someone accidentally fell in a ravine, someone ran, like, elsewhere. And then, so, it's incredibly odd, just the whole circumstance. There was somebody who went to their funerals and said that their skin had a deep brown tan, which is just odd. And then another group of hikers about 31 miles south of the incident reported that they saw strange orange spheres in the sky to the north on the night of the incident.
What are those aliens?
Right. Similar spheres were observed in that town and adjacent areas continually during this period from February to March in 1959 by various independent witnesses, including the Meteorology Service and the military. However, these sightings were not noted in the initial investigation in 1959, and these various independent witnesses only came 40 years later. This is from Wikipedia, by the way. I'm not stealing information. Okay. It's all incredibly odd. So obviously, like, one of the theories is an avalanche, which again, like, evidence contradicting the avalanche theory again says, like, there is no signs that an avalanche had taken place. Like, none. Just including, like, weather patterns, including, like, patterns of, like, snowfall that was there. Another thing is that over 100 expeditions to the region were held since the incident, and not one of them had reporting conditions that could have been likely to have an avalanche occur, which also kind of leads to the fact that, like, an avalanche based on, like, the topography and all, like, weather and everything in this area, just an avalanche could not have occurred. Pretty much. I mean, obviously, like, if one did happen, it's not impossible, but, like, it would be incredibly, incredibly rare. And again, there would have been evidence of it. Let's see here. They said that, like, the slope of the mountain, it would have passed the tent.
Like, we're tripping on acid.
It would have collapsed differently because the tent was collapsed, obviously, by the time they found it. It's all interesting. They were experienced skiers. They would not have stayed somewhere where an avalanche could have occurred. And footprint patterns were inconsistent with someone running in panic. That's also interesting. Running in panic. So all footprints leading to tent towards the were consistent with individuals were walking at a normal pace.
So they were walking like normal? Not running away?
Not running away. New light to the situation. So there are
what? So they, like, walked to their deaths?
So there's some theories on this. One, which some people of the region do find incredibly offensive. I'm putting that note up there now because of kind of, like, the media that has been sparked up around this theory. But it is also, like, one of those theories that, like, you can't just not mention. Is a Yeti. I mean, these massive tree limbs, these people are being chased, the fact that, like, parts of, like, their organs were missing, but also at the same time it was like the force that killed them was too strong to have been committed by a human. So that's a theory that's out there. That's also kind of along the lines of, like, the indigenous people knew, like, Yetis live there, don't go over there. But again, people of this region do find that theory offensive. They don't like that, and they feel like it's exploiting the people who have died there. So just putting that out there. So in 2019, so kind of recently for a 1950 death, someone noticed that there was katabatic wind, which kind of goes on with your theory of, like, there's this wind that's swirling weird and causes, like, frequencies and stuff, and, like, everybody just went batshit crazy and, like, killed themselves and each other. Which also goes around with, like, the infrasound generated by the wind as it passed over the top of the mountain was responsible for causing physical discomfort and mental stress. But they didn't find the eyes, though. They didn't find these missing organs. They were just gone.
Something probably ate them.
Okay, but wouldn't they have like, if their footprints... Okay, and this is, again, like, if there was an avalanche, would you have seen their footprints still? Like...
No.
Right. Anyway, but then on top of it, it's like, if they were able to notice their footprints, would they not have been able to notice, like, animal tracks?
Right.
Right. None of that was mentioned. I don't know if there's military tests. Like, with the lights, with one person having, I mean, it's odd that it was only one out of the entire group, one person having the, like, radioactivity on their clothing. They think there's potentially, like, military incidents, and that's kind of why it was, like, radiological weapons, and this incident was kind of, like, covered up by the USSR at the time. That was before it was Russia. And then another theory is the hypothermia, which they were so far within the hypothermia they thought they were hot. And they were, like, trying to get out of the heat of the tent. Yeah, that's most of it. It's just, it's so weird. I would say, if you were interested in this, maybe don't go to the Wikipedia article. I would say try and look up the Lore podcast. He goes really in depth with, like, other incidents that I have had a hard time finding on the internet regarding this, because this was a story that definitely stuck out to me, and to find information on this itself has been incredibly hard to find. Potentially I'm not looking in the right places, but I would say look there. It's very interesting. Maybe Devil's Pass. It's just the Yeti thing, the fact that there was, I mean, they think that somebody tried to crawl up there, but like, what are you looking for up there? Like, their theory behind like why the branches are broken is because like someone climbed up there to like look around. Like, what are you looking for? You know what I mean?
Maybe he was looking for the rest of his friends.
Maybe, but it's still just like, you know how far away from town you are. You know this isn't the time of cell phones. So even if you saw somebody else, like, what do they have that you do not have with like a perfectly good tent and materials and shit that you just like left behind? Like, they came well prepared. So if there's like another group of hikers that were also well prepared, I don't feel like it would give them any added benefit to find those people. You know what I mean? Whereas like now it's like you want to find somebody because maybe they have a working cell phone. You know, but like if you literally have everything, cell phones aren't existent, there's no like immediate outside contact, what would be the point of looking? So that's kind of the theory of like the Yeti was tall, broke off the branches, is running by chasing them, trying to eat them.
Threw him at the tree and he hit it.
Right, right.
Then how did the Yeti cover up his tracks? Are they just good at that?
I don't know Yeti's ways, man. I don't know. It's just the whole thing is odd. I would say, I mean, like what you pointed out with the Yeti tracks thing. I would say personally, I would go with the weird wind infrared sound thing or government testing. I still have no idea how one person could have radioactivity on them and literally nobody else, considering they're all pretty much together as a group. I mean, even when they died, the only one that was by themselves is the one that fell in the ravine, but I still feel like they were like by other people. They just didn't happen to fall in. So it's odd.
How did most of them die?
Hypothermia.
Just hypothermia?
Hypothermia. They like walked away from their tent without their clothes on, or like actively shedding their clothes. And these are experienced skiers and hikers who have like done this before.
So they just like literally just like ripped out of their own tent and then walked there to their deaths.
Yeah.
And then someone mysteriously went up into a tree or something.
Right.
And another one walked into a ravine.
Right. And then some of them are missing
it's
eyes
like
and a
that
tongue.
Fucking like The Happening, where it's like
right.
the trees like go and they
See,
put out that poison and they all kill yourself.
That's why I feel like the most realistic theory in this is the one with the infrared sound and the catabolic wind.
Because it just triggers something in your brain and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this one thing.
Right. I feel like that makes the most sense out of all the theories personally, which is odd because that was not one that was mentioned when I first heard this, unless I'm remembering correctly. I feel like it was very emphasized in the Yeti aspect.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can also touch on that a little bit now that I'm going into mine. Like, because there's this theory of, like, inner Earth. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about inner Earth, but, like, inner Earth is like that Alice in Wonderland crap where you fall down a hole and there's, like, this big opening. So there's kind of, like, two things with this. And I'm kind of on, like, more of the terms of, like, theory 2 than the whole, like, theory 1. Like, basically, there's the inner Earth where it's, like, hollow and there's a big cavern in the middle of the Earth, and then there's, like, a sun in the middle. I don't know what they call it. But
Journey to the center of the Earth.
Yeah, exactly. But it's basically two halves, or two crusts that kind of go like this, and then you get out of it mainly by the North and the South Pole. And so there's basically that theory, and there's like that whole like ecosystem down there.
Mm-hmm.
So let me pull up my notes because there's a lot to this thing.
I believe you.
Also, so it's like, but then the other theory is like, there's like huge lava, which I think is the most accurate. Is like there's huge like lava pockets in the crust of the Earth. As the Earth was forming, gas was being released, and there was huge pockets that cooled, and then eventually it seeped up to the the gas like seeped up to the earth. So we obviously know that there's random caves and huge caverns under the crust of the earth that we've already found. And then also what I find is interesting is like throughout history in Russia, all throughout the world, there's like cases of like us finding these strange caves where we either find like weird civilizations in them, or like even just in the United States, there's cases where indigenous people have recordings of other indigenous people living, and they were like recorded as odd and weird, living in these weird caves. So it's just like super interesting. And so another like kind of getting into that is like obviously there's these huge caverns, and obviously there's a lot of people on this planet that have access to getting into these areas to colonize them. So that's extremely interesting, but also kind of like I want to just like tap on a theory maybe of like yours is like in like the like lizard people interview that I'll touch on later. She talks about how they live in the caverns of they don't live in like all of the caverns but they have main huge open spaces that they have artificial light rooms, and they have obviously other places where their homes actually are. And so that it's interesting because she talks about one of their entrances specifically are where is it? In the Arctic and over Asia, especially over the mountains. So it's just like, where is that?
Okay.
So we looked it up, and it's extremely interesting now that like we're looking this up, because the mountains are over Asia, and obviously Russia's like in the Arctic
area.
So
yeah.
It's just interesting because that's their main entrance, and how they leave, like
Just for reference,
to get out of their areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting too. If you guys are curious, I might talk about this later. But their ships are like cigar cylindrical shaped, and they have like 5 lights on them, and they're like, did you say orange?
Orange.
Yeah, they're like orange lights.
Orange spherical lights. That is incredibly interesting. New theory. Add it to Wikipedia.
So that's what I'm like, and they're like, and they say it's like, if you go into their areas, beware and leave there immediately. And I don't know, like, if they have certain symbols up by that mountain, or if that's a specific territory they got into. And I mean, it's interesting too, because if someone saw something, because like they skied up too far,
Right.
if they skied up too far and went into where they weren't supposed to go, I have no idea how vindictive these people are.
That definitely, I mean, that's interesting. I also I didn't mention some of the specifics here, but it was like, in terms of like just the intensity of this their deaths, is that one person had a fractured skull, 2 had major chest fractures, and the body of one of the group was missing both its eyes. Another person was missing their tongue. I know I mentioned the last 2, but like.
And they eat flesh, by the way. Lizard people.
Skull fractures and
they have obviously telekinesis abilities, which we'll get into. I have so much stuff. I feel like all my shit connects.
Oddly fills in with this very well, which is interesting.
That is why I picked these ones, is because these ones are like, I swear, they're like my main conspiracy theories that I have like personally going on in my head, because that's why I want to talk about these. Because it's like, this is what trips me up personally. Is like all of this shit we already know is like kind of like nuts, and there's really not that much information surrounding these things. So it's very like plausible when you actually like do your research and you go ham into like these topics. You kind of just sit there and you're like, oh my god, whoa! I
know.
I could see how that would be for real.
I think it's important to say too, which I think anybody watching this already knows, is that as far as conspiracy theories go, going into it, you kind of have to like really open your mind and drop your baggage at the door, and then once you get into it far enough, it starts to kind of make sense, and then at that point you can choose if you're gonna go, okay, that's baloney, or like, okay, I believe that. And So definitely like dropping your baggage at the door, because I think definitely right away that's something for me where it's like,
you have to be open-minded first, and then you kind of like swift through the information. You're like, no, that's definitely garbage. That's definitely not possible, at least in my universe.
Right. I mean, yeah.
But then you kind of like shift to, okay, this is more along the lines of where I'm actually at and how I can actually see that happening. And then you start doing that investigation work, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy.
It blows my mind, because I feel like it's one thing to be like, oh, it's kind of in that area, maybe the snake people did it, to go like, okay, they have telekinesis powers, and one of the main theories does have to do with like mental duress, and it's odd that they walked out of there and they like ripped it open.
Well, they disguise themselves by showing themselves as human,
right,
with their mind abilities.
And I find it also odd the orange orb thing, that had been reported not during only this incident, but like through a period of a couple months there by several different people, including their own meteorology and army.
Main show. But the thing is though, she talks about in her thing is like they're very careful, and if you see something, like it's because they weren't careful enough. But my thing is like, if they were just flying over that mountain and they were just on the bottom of that mountain, I feel like they would have been completely fine. But I think those people skied
way too close.
Yeah, we're way too close.
And their goal was to go farther up.
Right. And I think they saw something and they were like, oh, no, you can't come. This is our territory. Because they seem in that interview that I watched that these people are very territorial.
I suppose that makes sense.
Even though it's interesting enough when I go into it, it's like reading the interview, it's kind of a little contradictive in personality, because with the lizard people, she talks about how I don't know. I think we're going to have to go into this on a separate in a part 2, because there's just like so much on this, and this video is already long. So let's say goodbye for tonight, and then we can
get to my best ones.
Well, we have to go.
I suppose.
And then we have to do this part 2.
My best ones yet to come. I saved the best for last.
I know. So part 2, and then you're gonna just hear us go off on crazy rants about how crazy this planet or dimension is. Who knows? All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye. See you later.